Welcome back. A Pakistani man with ties to Iran charged with plotting to assassinate former President Trump. The Department of Justice says this has no ties to the attack at Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. I sat down with former President Trump last week in Bedminster, New Jersey, at his golf club, right before he was going to be interviewed by the FBI about the assassination attempt on his life. I met the FBI agents that were there. He told me that the shooter in Butler could have foreign ties as well. Watch.
I think it's being reported that this kid maybe wasn't quite as innocent as people think. He had some encryptions that may be foreign-based, and they can't open up the app. They can't open up his phone, another way of saying it, because, as you know, Apple controls that. They can open it, but nobody else can. And, you know, when it comes to assassination attempts, I think you're going to have to be able to open up a phone. So they're going to have to see if that happens. But we're hearing that they may have 3 situations where they can't get access to the information. You can't have that happen.
So are you thinking maybe this was a foreign adversary?
I have no idea. I'm just saying what's been reported and what I heard.
What do you think happened that day? Can you tell us a little about
Well, I would say that he's just a very disturbed young man. It would seem that he might be liberally based, okay, or progressive, as the expression goes.
Joining me now is Florida Congressman Brian Mast, member of the House Foreign Affairs and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees. He's also a U.S. Army veteran, a recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart medals. Congressman, thanks very much for all of your service to our great nation, and thanks for being here.
Always glad to.
What is your reaction to what you just heard? It's still a question as far as why we don't know more information about these assassination attacks.
Yeah, unfortunately, every single day since July 13th, we all come away with more questions about not just what were the origins of the attacks, but how was any attacker, whether foreign-based or otherwise, able to get so close to President Trump. All of these security failures for what is supposed to be the gold standard of dignitary protection. Is there certainly a potential that this could be tied to Iran or someone else? Absolutely, and that makes one of those really big questions. Why? Because everybody knows that President Trump, Mike Pompeo, anybody else that was a part of killing that Iranian Revolutionary Guard leader, Qasem Soleimani, is forever and for the rest of their life on a highly targeted list by Iran for any an assassination attempt. So why wasn't the security hired? That question always has to exist.
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, there's a question around China, and I want to get your take on this. Our #1 adversary, Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate, Tim Walz, has been praising China. He lived there for a year. He was teaching there for a year. He visited the country about 30 times. He even honeymooned in China. Walz even speaks a small amount of Mandarin and ran a business taking students to China. In 2019, Walz called for President Trump to end his trade war with China, claiming that it was hurting U.S. farmers. And then in 2016, Walz said this: "I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship." Congressman, your thoughts on the vice presidential pick on the Democrat side and his ties and relationships in China?
There's so much about him that's concerning to me. One of the statements that wasn't brought up just now about his ties to China, as he was bringing in people into China for these exchange programs, his message to them was downplay your Americanness. That's not something I ever want to hear from somebody that is vying to be vice president of the United States, maybe potentially president of the United States someday. Downplay your Americanness. Try to take on more of a Chinese role. It should be the exact opposite of what's going on. That wasn't his role. One of the other things, major concern about this individual, I don't know if you're going to talk about, he was in the military. He lost his rank as Command Sergeant Major. Why? Because he decided he was going to choose Congress over combat. That's something no warrior that I know would ever do.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. But let me just close the loop on China here, because when he's running this business that is doing exchange of students, the U.S. and China, is it not true? I mean, you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee, but is it not true that Communist China has used many students to exploit the visa process, to actually become surveillance tools for the Communist Party of China?
Over and over and over again in Ivy League universities to community colleges. This is something that's taken place. They're exploiting that visa program. And the schools want this in many parts. Why? Because the Chinese Communist Party are sending these individuals in as, let's call them, cash-paying, tuition cash-paying individuals. So they're just welcoming them in with open arms. And again, just to go back to that point, anybody that's a part of that conversation should be getting Americanized, not being told, hey, Americans, you downplay your Americanness. That can't be the path.
No wonder there's all this propaganda on TikTok about how great he is. But let me get back to the military, which you just brought up. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz accused of stolen valor. 3 retired command sergeant majors have accused Walz of retiring from their Minnesota National Guard just before their deployment to Iraq in 2005. They also said that he misrepresented himself as a command sergeant major, despite his retirement causing him to lose the promotion. Watch this.
He abandoned us. You know, I mean, what the hell kind of leader does that? I mean, he just, as soon as the shots were fired in Iraq, he turned and ran the other way and hung his hat up and quit.
As far as I know, he's the only one that has bailed in a senior position and then used that 10 minutes and no credibility to hold that position, no experience, to somehow bolster his credibility in Congress. And even his webpage lays claim that at the time when he retired, he was the senior non-commissioned officer in southern Minnesota. Hello, Tom Behrens lives in southern Minnesota in his district. I think Tom Behrens was a sergeant major at the time.
Congressman, you are a U.S. Army veteran, the recipient of the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. Your thoughts on this individual in terms of what this says about the ticket?
I don't say these words lightly at all. If you leave your men, your soldiers, your women, whoever they are, under your command, command sergeant major, under his command, if you leave them on the heels of combat, that is an act of cowardice. That is not an act of leadership. It is not an act of somebody that may potentially wear the title of commander-in-chief one day. You cannot have those two running together. At all. It breaks my heart to hear that that's what his soldiers were saying about him.
I mean, look, there are questions all morning long, really, about why Kamala Harris would double down on a progressive agenda by choosing him. But I guess Josh Shapiro, who many people expected to get the role, was Jewish, and she was afraid to lose that Palestinian vote. Is that the way you see it?
I've heard that part of it. And, you know, to bring a little joke into this, I've heard people calling him Tampon Tim. Because why? He was a progressive individual that wanted to put tampons in boys' locker rooms in the schools as governor. He's a progressive governor. These are the kind of policies that he's taking place. So it makes perfect sense why he's being chosen by the Biden administration, or by the Harris administration, because they are just a continuation of the extremism of the Biden administration, and maybe even were the ones that were in charge of the Biden administration during all of these debacles that we've seen, from the Afghanistan withdrawal, certainly the southern border. They're trying to downplay that she was the border czar. The list goes on and on.
Yeah. Real quick before you go, do you have anything to say about the state of our military today, given this most recent National Defense report that if we were to see a conflict with China and Russia, that the U.S. would be on the losing end of things?
We have outstanding service members, and we have some really good leaders. I served under the command of our current CENTCOM commander. We have some great leaders, but our military has to have the backing of the commander-in-chief, whoever that is, that they're not going to be hung out to dry. You can't have these situations where their paychecks are just being dwindled by inflation. You have to make the human beings more important than the hardware if you want to have the strongest possible military.
Sure. Makes perfect sense. Congressman, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.